everybody, it's Ruby here today, and today I wanted to do my wrap-up slash to be read video for July and August. I'm quite proud of this month actually, because I was a little bit worried that I wasn't getting through as many books as I was last year, just because I've had to move and I've had a spring class and stuff like that. But while I had some time alone, I did get through quite a few books, so I'll be showing that to you guys. The first of which is The Sex Myth by Rachel Hills, which I did a review on last week, which I'll link down below. That was just basically about sexual liberation and how it's a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to how we judge people based on their experimentation and experiences, as well as how little or how much sex that they're having. The second book that I read was The Language of Metaphors by Andrew Goatley. This is a book about how we classify metaphors in linguistics. So the vehicle, grounds, and topic that are in a sentence that allow us to relate one particular idea with another when it comes to comparing metaphors, similes, analogies, and allegories, and that sort of thing. Definitely a lot of notes that I took on this, but there isn't an overarching idea that came out of this book necessarily. It was just an introductory read to metaphors. So I'd definitely recommend it to anybody interested in that particular topic, but you're not missing a whole lot by not reading this. Then I tried to do a Crush Your TBR readathon that was going on Twitter. I started it on Friday, but then on Saturday I slept in and ended up going to a concert, and Sunday I had to clean. So I ended up only being able to do one day of that readathon, but I did get quite a few done within that day that I had been just putting off because they weren't full books that I was doing. The first of which is The Creature Vault. This is a companion book basically to how they created creatures in the movies, so sketches and concept art and overall ideas for the characters and creatures. This was a book that I got, I think, for Christmas from my dad, but I hadn't read it cover to cover. For these sorts of books, for coffee table books, you don't necessarily need to read them cover to cover, but as a Harry Potter nerd, I thought that it was only necessary that I would anyways, so I just wanted to sort of finish that, and it was pretty cool. Not much to say about it, except I learned a lot about how much work goes into trying to figure out how to create magical creatures. Second one that I read was The Annotated Northwest Passage by Scott Chandler. This is a historical fiction graphic novel about Canada, so the fur trade and when we were first becoming a country. I picked it up because I'm definitely interested in this topic, but I am not interested enough to read a full book on it, so I thought a graphic novel would work, and also because I picked it up from a secondhand bookshop that I love that just reopened, so I wanted to support them. Overall, this wasn't necessarily to my tastes. The author, especially in the annotated bits, explained that the characters in this are not real characters, they're characters based off of other characters, or other people in history, which made it super confusing because I already don't know that much about our history in that particular time, so to read something that's based off of those characters made it even more confusing. And I was also a little bit iffy about the portrayal of Aboriginal people in this. There was a significant portion that were in this because at the time, before we assimilated Aboriginal people into churches, we were best of buds because they were helping us navigate the country. But it was still very stereotypical portrayal, a lot of like teepees and feathers and loincloths, and I wasn't 100% certain about how he portrayed the spiritual religious aspect of it. But he did say that he did research that portion, so I could be entirely wrong about it, and the whole reason for the stereotype was because it's true. I don't know, it was okay. The other book that I wanted to mention was The Last Buccaneer, which I also requested off of NetGalley, and I'd mentioned in my to be read list last month. I got within the first chapter of it and thought about how many books were on my TBR bookshelf and how I wasn't really getting into it, and I ended up having to stop. It was a good book, but it was very general fiction, catering to a large audience sort of book. Very much expository, sort of explaining the character's intentions and describing books in such a way that I couldn't really relate to. So it wasn't really my cup of tea. I should have realized that when I requested it, but I wanted to give it a chance and ended up not working. And honestly, it was probably just me and my pretentiousness, because I know a lot of people like that sort of book, like that author. So what do you know? Then I have the book that I think should get me a medal, because this book took me 20 hours to read, and it's only about 320 pages, so it took me 3 times as long to read this book as it did any other book. It is the other pretentious metaphor book that I had to read for my independent study, which is The Rule of Metaphor by Paul Ricoeur, I think. And as you can see, a lot of notes as well. A lot of interesting stuff from this, but it is a like historical, philosophical explanation of how we consider metaphors back to Aristotle and the idea of rhetoric. So I think that's when they thought that eloquence related to good thought. I think that language and thought were kind of combined up until existential philosophy and Heidegger. So very dense, a lot of interesting things. I'm gonna have to go back and read it to really fully understand, just the annotated bits, not 20 hours of cover to cover book stuff. Again, not a lot of like coherent information coming out of this book that I can do a book review on. I would never wish this book on anybody else, and I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm actually a little bit disheartened that my professor would recommend I read this book, because it was painful. But I guess I took it on too as a cover-to-cover book to read in summer. So last book that I'm mentioning is Voice of Fire by Alan Moore. I just did a book review on this, which I will post up next week, so watch out for that. This is a historical fiction book as well. Very much like Edward Rutherford and those sorts of authors, where you take a character per era of history and sort of tell their story. So this goes from 4000 BC to 1995, and I think there's 12 different characters, all of which have their own spiritual adventures and life in Northampton. But like I said, there's going to be a larger book review on that, so I'll link that down below once I have it up. So because I was so proud of myself that I finished all of those books, especially The Rule of Metaphor, which took like 20 hours, I thought, hey, Ruby, why don't you read even more books in August? So I'm not sure if I'll be able to finish all of these. This is probably a to be read for August and for September, but I would like to get through as many of these books as possible in the next little while, all for different reasons, which I will explain in a second. So there are 3 Red Dwarf books that I would like to read. These are a friend of mine's, and he said I could read them for, or keep them for as long as possible, but I would like to return them to him, especially because I found more to be read books that I want to put on my shelf, and because I know that they're going to be quick, easy reads for the next little while. These are probably what I would term as like beach reads, honestly, although whatever. So Red Dwarf is a comedic science fiction TV show in the 90s, which was also turned into books, so we'll see what happens there. And then I have The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman. I had read the last 2 books over the spring and winter term because I had to read the first one by him in a class, and I liked it enough to read the second one, which wasn't as great, and I just haven't had a chance to read the third one yet. But it's been on my mind because it's the end of a series, and also because he's really good at allegories, which I'm extremely interested in, so I'll have to give that a chance this month. Then I have The Spire by William Golding. This was mentioned in the Language of Metaphors book, this one. This guy actually would take quotes from books that use a lot of metaphors or use allegories, and he would use them as examples in his book. And The Spire was used quite often, and my dad had actually recommended this book as well because it's an allegory and it's also sort of Freudian, I guess. So we'll have to give it a chance. It's definitely a classic. Everything by William Golding is a classic. And it's also kind of short. Then a commenter on one of my videos mentioned that I should read this, and I got into a discussion with him. I had previously tried to read this book when I was younger and couldn't get into it, so I wrote it off and didn't try again. But I think that I've read enough dry books and I'm further along in my life now that I think I can retry that, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. And I think a lot of people in these videos are gonna laugh at me because it isn't that hard of a book to read, but I find that his writing style, which is very dense, he's someone who assumes that you already know the world by the time you're reading the first chapter. So I'm gonna give it another go. This is my dad's copy. You can tell because it's this really cheesy cover from the 1950s, and it's by Signet, which is a really cool publisher. So I'm not sure if I'm actually allowed to read this copy. I'll have to ask him, but I will give it a go anyways. I'm sure there's 100 different sorts of copies that I can get online or at the library anyways. And lastly, but not leastly, is going to be IQ 84 by Murakami. I got this book from my dad for Christmas, I believe. It was a book that was recommended to me in high school, and I was recommended a couple of other Murakami books, which are probably best to read before this one, but I figured I already have one on my shelf that I haven't read by him yet. I should probably give this a go first. So I will attempt to read this. This one is extremely huge. It's actually, I think, 3 different books in one. So I will be crying by the end of it. And this is also why I said this will leak into September probably. This is my War and Peace book of the year sort of thing, because I read War and Peace last year around this time. But we'll give it a go. It's over 1,000 pages, so I'll be crying. But that is everything for you guys. That was a pretty long video, I'm sure, but a lot of really cool books, a lot of books that I'm excited about. I'm definitely getting into some of the classics that I haven't read yet. I sort of finished most of the books that I've been needing to read, and now I'm into the books that I'd like to read. So comment down below if there's any books that you find interesting or that you'd like to read or that you think I should read first, and I will talk to you guys later.